Whosever room this is still hasn't discovered me in their room, so I live to expound the Bible another day. So we're in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 to 13 now. It's a bit of an odd passage of the Bible because it's all about food offered to idols and should we eat food offered to idols. Now, that isn't really a live issue in the church today, you might have noticed. But there's a broader principle here that I'd love to go into. And actually, it's referred to quite a few times in 1 Corinthians particularly. And you might have noticed in your readings that in chapter 6, Paul says, all things are lawful for me. I will not be enslaved by anything. So things I can do, I'm free to do many of these things that many people thought, oh, we can't do that. So some of the examples are the food laws, the Jewish food laws. Some of the Jewish Christians were saying, oh, we should still keep the food laws, even though God has said, well, actually, you're free now to eat all these foods. He said that to Peter and in other places. And then we also have divisions of people saying, oh, we should, treat this one day, the Sabbath, as holy. And then other people will say, well, actually, every day is holy now. So you get this constant sort of confusion and division going on in the church. And actually, this, I think, is one of the most mysterious parts of the New Testament, which is that it seems to be, and I hope this isn't heresy, but I think this is the case, that there are some things that are sinful for one person that would not be sinful for another. And that is to say that, for example, if you say, well, I really feel strongly and I have faith that I can eat this, I can eat whatever this is, for example, food that's been offered to an idol. And another person would say, I really don't feel comfortable doing that. But if that person who didn't feel comfortable was then to say, oh, okay, well, I'll eat it anyway, to them, because they're not doing that in faith and their conscience is troubled, the Bible actually says that that's sin for them. Whereas for someone who has a strong conscience, knows that they're free before God to do that, that is not a sin for them because they're doing it in faith. So it's a very sort of mysterious principle that we find in the New Testament. And so we're talking about food offered to idols here is not relevant to our church context right now. But there are two things that I just like to look at from this that are still very, very relevant to us. There's two things I think from this passage that we can learn. One is being mindful of other people's journeys, and the other is not creating division within the church. Clearly don't know which camera to look at, just realised it's that one. So the first one is being mindful of people's journeys. And so, for example, you may have friends, I've had friends that come from a Catholic tradition and become Christ followers, having been raised in a Catholic Christian upbringing. And for example, they may say, oh, I don't eat fish. I only eat fish on Fridays. I don't eat meat on Fridays. And they see that as something that's like a really, almost like a sin if they were to do it, even though it's not in the Bible. So you wouldn't have them round for a barbecue and on a Friday and be like, we just got loads of meat and you're free to eat it. Because even though it's true they are free to eat it before God, if you're just kind of forcing it on them and they haven't reached that place in their own journey yet where they feel comfortable, you're actually leading that person to a place of confusion and a weak conscience and into a place of sin actually. And Paul is very clear about, that's actually creating a stumbling block for a believer. So we're not to do that. Better to have someone from that, tradition who is a Christian, but they're still trying to work that stuff out. Get them over, have a bit of fish. Why not have a bit of fish? You have fish, I have fish. It's all great. So that's an example of how you might do something like that. The other thing is that we don't want division in the church. Like these things where people decide on one side of the argument or the other, weak side of the argument versus strong side, with any of these things can always be a seedbed for division, because people maybe put their identity in, well, I'm the kind of person that believes this, and I have this conviction, and we're not like the people that don't get it and they still think this. we mustn't let anything like that become a dividing force in the church. I mean, heaven forbid. We want the church to be united, and we need to see that we are brothers and sisters in Christ and not let things like that divide us. Now, far be it from me to get political, and I really don't want to get political, but an example of this that I see at the moment is all this stuff to do with COVID. There's a million different opinions out there about everything. You know, you've got some people that, and I'm not necessarily talking about in the church building, but let's just say out and about in town, still want to be wearing masks. Other people really happy to not be wearing masks again. Some people still want to maintain a bit of social distance, even though the restrictions are lifted, and other people, you know, are happy to be hugging again. And then obviously you've got people who are vaxxed up and they're loving it, and then you've got people that are a bit more like, well, actually I'm not sure about that, and I want to wait and see, and you know, and they have their own qualms. And I'm really keen for this to not be an issue of division in the church. And if we look at these principles here, like, first of all, being mindful of people's personal journeys. You know, if someone, you know, wants to keep a bit of distance, they still want to wear their mask, you know, that's great. Maybe when you go around their house, you know, maybe you sit in the garden rather than, you know, sit in the lounge if it makes them feel comfortable. And what you're doing is you're humbling yourself. Even though you're free, as Paul says, you know, all things are lawful for me. Out of love for that brother, you're saying, well, look, I want to make you feel comfortable. I don't want your conscience to be troubled. This is slightly different because we're not talking necessarily about sin, but we're still talking about taking the hit ourselves rather than insisting on your liberty and your freedom to do, you know, what you think is right to do. Just still thinking, okay, well, this is where they're at and I want to meet them where they're at, which is what Jesus did with us, obviously. So that's the being mindful of the journey. And as I said before, we really don't want these things causing division. Let's, I think, be super, super aware that we don't let where we fall in the masks or the vaccines or social distancing and all those things, let's not let them get in the way of unity in the church. Let's be super aware of the voice of the enemy that might come in and say, the people that don't want the vaccine, oh yeah, they're just they're a burden to society, and they're just fear mongering and da da da. Well, we don't want that. And we don't want to say, well, these people that are just, terrified, they should trust God more, they take off their mask, let's not do that either, okay? Probably didn't need to give examples, but I tried to be balanced there. But really, come on, let's keep the main thing. Christ loves the church, he gave himself for her. Let's be unified, and let's not let these things get in the way. Let's think about how this can apply in this context. Okay, so we're going to look at that a bit more tomorrow when Paul talks about the freedoms that he has and how and when he chooses to use them. Cool. I'll see you tomorrow. Bless you.